Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual retro seminar. My name is Alan Morrison. I'm Professor of Law and Finance at the Saïd Business School, and here with me today is Rita Mota, who's the Intesa Sanpaolo Research Fellow at the Saïd Business School and the co-convener with me of these seminars, and also our speaker, Jeff Moriarty. Jeff is Professor of Philosophy at Bentley University. He's concerned in his research with distributive justice, and much of his most acclaimed work is at the intersection of business ethics and political philosophy. His recent publications have examined the market failures approach to business ethics, and he's also concerned with wages lately and with wage secrecy. Jeff's also the executive director of the Hoffman Center for Business Ethics at Bentley, which is a research and education establishment that's been devoted to the advancement of business ethics since its establishment in 1976. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. I'm going to turn the floor over to Jeff in a moment, but first let me say a couple of things about the seminar series. RETRO stands for Reputation, Ethics, Trust and Relationships at Oxford, and it's intended to be a seminar series that addresses ethical and normative questions related to trust and reputation in organizational life. It's one of a range of seminars and conferences that occurs through the Center for Corporate Reputation. Many of the activities that the Center enables were interrupted by the current pandemic, so being able to run these seminars online is a great thing for us. They've proved to be just as intellectually exciting as our in-person seminar series, and we've also been very fortunate to attract a wide audience and make new friends from all over the world. It's obviously hard work to make this happen, so thank you to Rupert Younger, Director of the CCR, to Sarah Livingston, Chris Page and Mark Hughes Morgan, and thank you especially to Rita, without whom none of this would happen. She is the main motive force behind the seminar series. So, to today's topic. In early September 2000, when the internet was still emerging from its Wild West days, Amazon was revealed to be charging new visitors to its website less for DVD purchases than it was charging its pre-existing and therefore presumably loyal customers. The firm was excoriated for that practice. Customers and investors learned something about its practices, or at least thought they did, and its reputation was surely harmed. By the end of the month, Amazon had apologized for the practice and had ceased to engage in it. But other internet companies continue to offer prices that are tailored to the person, and customers appear generally to dislike the practice. Of course, price discrimination isn't a new thing, it's a well understood phenomenon, and at least in the economics textbooks, it's a good thing because it maximizes utilitarian measures of aggregate welfare. So why then is price discrimination apparently such a severe reputational risk? And why do consumers find it so objectionable? That's the subject of today's talk. Jeff's paper presents an explanation that's based upon fairness, and his work sheds new and important light on foundational questions that underpin much of the work that the Center for Corporate Reputation is engaged in. Because the seminar is online and because there are quite a few people here, we have to be slightly formal about the Q&A format. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, which is probably at the bottom of your screen, and not into the chat. Rita or I will relay them to Jeff when he's finished speaking. Jeff's going to speak for 20 to 30 minutes. During that time, he'll only respond to clarification questions. After that, I hope we can have a reasonably wide-ranging discussion. As usual, we're going to finish very promptly at exactly 5 o'clock. Jeff, thank you for being here, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Alan, and thanks, Rita. Thanks for the Oxford Center for Corporate Reputation for having me here to give this talk. So I have a set of slides, and I'm going to work through these slides. I trust that you can all see them. Someone will jump and let me know if you can't. So I'm interested in this phenomenon of price personalization. People are upset about it, but the question is, should they be upset? Here's an example of price personalization. This came out of the Wall Street Journal inquiry back in 2012. They found that Staples was selling the same stapler to different people at the same time at different prices. And the price was varied based on zip code. When Staples presented information to consumers about this, when the Wall Street Journal presented information to consumers about this, people were very upset. They said, oh my gosh, how can Staples get away with this? You know, who do they think they are doing this? So people are very angry, corporations, when they do this thing. But it's not clear that they should be angry. And so the point of this talk is to try to explore that tension and try to figure out, you know, what is this new practice? How should we understand it? And is it morally permissible practice? So here's the summary of the paper. So as a matter of fact, online retailers are increasingly personalizing prices. By that, I mean they're charging more to shoppers who they think will pay more and less to shoppers who they think will pay less. So this is just one example from the Wall Street Journal, but in fact, there are many other examples that we will discuss. So is that ethically permissible? I say no, and the reason I give for that is that retailers are competing unfairly for the surplus created by the transaction. I'll explain what those terms mean as we go. So it's wrong for retailers to do this, at least until it becomes common knowledge that they are doing it, in which case I think it becomes not wrong. So in the meantime, however, retailers should disclose the fact that they're engaging in this practice. So I want to begin by defining some terms. So I mentioned reservation price. And if you know something about economics, this will be perfectly familiar. We can go pretty quickly, I think, in this audience. So reservation price is a limit. So the buyer's reservation price is the highest price that she will pay for a good. The seller's price is the lowest price that she will accept for the good. And people's individual reservation prices can differ. So if you and I are shopping on Amazon, let's say for a video game, I might really want that video game. Maybe I'll pay $12 for it. You might want the video game a little bit less, and so you'll be willing to pay a little bit less for it. Sorry, I'm just adjusting something on my screen. So our reservation prices are different. And the goal of price personalization regime or scheme is to try to figure out what people's reservation prices are and price the goods accordingly, so that Amazon might show me a higher price than it shows you if it knows that I will pay more than you, if my reservation price is higher than you. So what is the social surplus? The social surplus is another term from economics. It's the difference between the seller's and the buyer's reservation price. So if there's no overlap between the reservation prices of the buyer and seller, that means that no transaction will occur. The lowest price that the seller will accept is higher than the highest price that the buyer is willing to pay. So there's no overlap in that case. But where there is an overlap, where Amazon is willing to sell the good for $9 and I'm willing to pay as much for $12, then a transaction is possible. And then we might ask, how will that social surplus be split? So Amazon, of course, is willing to sell it for $12. They're also willing to sell it for $9. I'm willing to buy it for $9. That's less than my reservation price, but as much as $12. So then there's this $3. That's the social surplus. If it goes all to me, it's the consumer surplus. If it goes all to Amazon, it's the producer surplus, and then there might be other divisions of that surplus. So another way to understand price personalization is not just kind of targeting people's reservation prices, but to try to capture as much of that social surplus as they possibly can. So how do retailers do this? How do they gauge in personalized pricing? How do they target prices to individuals? Good question, and we don't really know because retailers are reluctant to tell us how they're doing this. They're even reluctant to admit that they are doing this because, as I said, people get very upset. So they're not eager to disclose the fact that this is what's happening. But it seems to be that they are targeting people based on factors like zip code. That's actually what Staples did. So what Staples did is they figured that somebody who was located in a zip code with a close competitor like an Office Max or an Office Depot is maybe willing to pay less than somebody who lives in a zip code where there is not a close competitor. So the person who lives in a zip code where there's not a close competitor is kind of stuck paying Staples prices, sort of. So they're willing to pay more, but somebody who lives in a zip code where there's a lot of competition, if Staples not charging a high price, they'll go down the road, at least virtually, to a competitor. So Staples did it based on zip code, but other retailers seem to do it on device type, social media activity, browsing history. So in other words, how often you visited the site, browsing behavior. So what you do on the site and where you hover your clicker. So all of this is information that retailers can get from you, the individual shopper, browser, but they also may buy large sets of data from data brokers where they come to understand what people like you, maybe not you specifically, but people like you do, and what they're willing to pay for certain kinds of goods, after they perform certain kinds of activities online. So no, you're permitted to do this. It's not like they're saying, well, we know that men or women are willing to pay this much, or Latinos versus Asians. So it's not based on these what we call in the U.S. protected categories, but it's based on these other factors: zip code, device type, social media activity, and so on. So as I said, online retailers generally deny that they're personalizing prices. So Alan mentioned the Amazon case. This is way back in 2000. They said, well, I'm sorry. They said, I'm very, very sorry. We were just trying something out. It was a very ill-considered idea, and we promised never to do it again. But it's probable that they are doing it again. Basically, researchers set up computers in different places and then log on to websites at the same time, and to look to see what prices are being displayed. And the evidence indicates that individuals are being shown different prices for the same goods at the same time. And this happens, of course, on travel sites, and maybe we're familiar with that, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but it happens on Amazon as well, despite their denials, Home Depot, and a variety of other retailers. And it looks like this is going to continue to happen. So this is made possible by technology, and the technology exists. If it behaves like other technologies that we're familiar with, and why wouldn't it? It will become cheaper, more widely available, and better. And retailers more retailers will likely use it. Okay, so our question is, is this wrong? Is this wrong behavior? So I'm interested very much in the moral contours of business activity. So my question simply is this a wrong behavior? I'm not primarily concerned with, should this be regulated away? Should there be laws against this? That might be an inference you would make, but I'm interested in the moral question. Is this wrong? No, people have a strong intuitive reaction that online personalized pricing is wrong. And this happened back with Amazon in 2000. People said this was outrageous. And Amazon was forced to apologize and promise it would never happen again, but it continues to happen. So this is a finding that is pretty robust across the years, that people seem upset when they're told that retailers are doing this. Ultimately, I'm going to say that people are right. The people are right to be upset. I think that this is a wrong behavior, morally wrong behavior. But first, I want to push back against that view a bit, and I'll do that by putting personalized pricing in context. And the point of this is to get you to see that personalized pricing is not all that new or novel or strange or different. It's actually an iteration of a common pricing practice that we're all familiar with and basically accept. I'm not actually trying to get you to believe that personalized pricing in the end is okay. I think it is not okay. But I want you to sort of realize that maybe people's initial reactions to it are possibly overblown. Okay, so following my time, good. So let's see. Personalized pricing is a kind of price discrimination. So price discrimination is not the kind of discrimination, at least as an economist might use the term, is not the kind of discrimination that you find on the basis of race or sex. It's discrimination based on willingness to pay. So in price discrimination, retailers try to sell goods at higher prices to people who are willing to pay more, and they sell goods to lower prices to people who are willing to pay less. So it's discrimination, but among buyers based on how much they're willing to pay for the good. They might think, well, this is not making things any better. I still think that's quite wrong. But you probably, okay, let me put it in context, and then you will think, I think differently. So economists distinguish three types or degrees of price discrimination. So the first is personalized pricing. That's sometimes called perfect price discrimination. First degree price discrimination. This is different prices for different individuals. So it's discrimination at the individual level. So if my reservation price is higher, I will pay more than if your reservation price is lower, you'll pay less. Second degree price discrimination is price discrimination for different quantities or types. So rebates, versioning, quantity discounts, those are all versions of all types of second degree price discrimination. Rebates and quantity discounts, I think, are familiar enough. Versioning is when companies come out with like two versions of something, and one is a lot more expensive than the other, but it actually doesn't cost all that much more to produce. Economists refer to that as a kind of second degree price discrimination. Hardback and softback books are the paradigmatic example. So hardback books cost a lot more for consumers to buy than softcover books, but hardback books are not that much more expensive to produce. So what retailers are trying to do is figure out who wants the book more. The hardback comes out first, and they make it more expensive. But the reality is it's not that much more expensive to produce the hardcover book. People get really angry if they just say, well, here's the softcover book and we're going to charge more until a certain time, and then we're going to charge less for that same book. So they kind of just make it a slightly different version. Okay, third is the most common kind of price discrimination. That's different prices for different groups. So this is not based on individuals, but it's based on group membership. So senior discounts, student discounts, these are all versions of price discrimination. So if you belong to a certain group, you might get charged a different price than if you belong to a different group. Now that I've told you about all these different kinds of price discrimination, I'll just remind you, and you probably already know this, that price discrimination happens all the time, especially third degree price discrimination. We don't, I think, necessarily talk about charging more to kind of certain groups, but we talk about charging less to certain groups. People like discounts more than upcharges. But not only does like second and third degree price discrimination happen all the time, so does first degree price discrimination. It happens, well, at least a fair amount. So consider how people buy cars or homes, furniture, mortgages. Some of these examples may be specific to the US. Home renovations, trinkets and flea markets. Prices for all of these goods and others that you could probably think about, in mattresses maybe, they're determined by negotiation, and negotiation usually involves a kind of discrimination, at least at the margin. So different buyers are going to pay different prices, and that's going to be dependent on how much they want the good, in other words, what their reservation price is, but also the negotiating skill, which is going to differ from person to person. I'll mention as a historical side note that price personalization used to be the norm. It used to be that people did not put price tags on goods, but there was like a range of prices that a retailer might accept for something, and then they negotiated on a case-by-case basis. Allegedly, the first store to start using putting price tags on goods as a uniform practice was Wanamaker's in Philadelphia, at least according to the internet sites I was reading. Here's a picture of Wanamaker's. Okay, so price discrimination, including personalized pricing, is common. It's widely accepted, moreover, and I think you could probably find some good reasons for accepting it. The one that economists would like, I'm just going to kind of push ahead a little bit further here, a little faster. The one that economists are most excited about is social welfare. So there are some mathematical proofs to the effect that price discrimination enhances social welfare by eliminating these deadweight losses, insofar as it allows producers to increase output. There is a fancy mathematical proof for this. I'm not going to go through it, but you can understand it intuitively if you think about drug prices. So Western multinational pharmaceutical companies sell medical drugs for a lot less money in developing countries than in developed countries. In other words, they engage in price discrimination. Let's call it third degree price discrimination. What if they were forced to charge uniform prices, the same price for everyone? Which price would they choose, the developing world price or the developed world price, they would probably choose the developed world price or something awfully close to it. And that would mean that the people in the developing world would go without, because they simply don't pay enough to cover the cost of developing a medical drug, which could be in the order of several $billion. That means that they would go without. In other words, if producers discriminate and therefore sell the good to more things, they increase output, then that's actually better from the point of social welfare than if they're forced to charge a uniform price. They can bring the transaction to more parties. So now you might be thinking, oh, great. There's nothing wrong with personalizing prices online. This is just the latest techie iteration of a familiar and even justified pricing practice. We're all familiar with instances of first and second and third degree price discrimination. There's even reasons for thinking it's good if you crack open an economics textbook, or it's just, this is something that we accept and get used to, even though we might find it in some cases distasteful. If you don't like bargaining over the price of a car, you might think, oh, I don't like this, but I guess it's okay. Some people, I think, really do like it. It really makes them excited. So where are we at? I'm actually I'm not trying to convince you that personalized pricing is okay. I'm going to sort of argue that it's not okay. But what I want to say is, there's actually some reasons for thinking that it might be okay. The reasons I'm going to push back against in just a moment. But I think now the burden of proof is on somebody like me and somebody perhaps like you who thinks that personalized pricing is not morally okay. The reasons need to be given for why this is wrong. And I also think those reasons, the best reasons, are going to be reasons that target online personalized pricing, hereafter OPP, specifically, not personalized pricing generally or price discrimination even more generally. So it's unlikely that price personalization in general is wrong, I think. And I think it's even more unlikely that price discrimination is wrong. I think that's just be very unlikely to be true. So the most successful arguments against online personalized pricing will focus on that particular practice. Here's a couple of arguments. Okay, and yeah, I think I'm on a reasonable track here. So there are two arguments I'm going to consider, one from invasion of privacy and then the other from unfair competition. I'm going to explain this invasion of privacy argument, but I argue that it fails. And then I'll explain this argument from unfair competition and argue that it succeeds. Okay, so one reason that you might think online personalized pricing, OPP, is wrong, despite everything we just said about it, is that you might say it's an invasion of privacy. So you might think it violates your right to informational privacy. So online retailers are collecting a lot of information about you. They're buying even more information about you, zip code, device type, social media activity, browsing history, browsing behavior. And they're doing this, all of it without your consent. And you might say that is wrong. That's an invasion of privacy. Here is an analogy that you might draw on to make your case. You might say, imagine you're in your living room, you're shopping online for cookie jars at collectorcookiejars.com. And all the while, someone, Fred, his name is Fred, is peering through the window, collecting information about you. Fred relays that information to the seller, who uses it to adjust its prices to what it estimates is your reservation price. You say, well, Fred is invading your privacy. I think that's pretty clear. And so he's outside your house, he's peering through your window, he's collecting this information about you and sharing it with a third party. So Fred is invading your privacy. If we wanted to think about, what privacy is, we could just stop with the intuition that he's invading your privacy, but we can develop it slightly further. Having informational privacy is a matter of being able to control a zone of personal information about yourself. Fred violates that right by taking certain information out of your control. He kind of reaches in and he grabs it from you. You did not agree to give Fred that information. If you did, of course, it would be quite fine. But you did not. He kind of reaches in and grabs that information. He gives himself unconsented to access to this information that is personal about you. Very important to this argument is that you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your living room, so that what you do in your living room is off limits to other people, that they're not allowed to sit outside your house and stare inside. That's not okay, because that's a private space. Now, suppose instead that you're shopping online for cookie jars in a public park, and you project the contents of your laptop onto a large screen in the middle of the park. And suppose Fred is there, and Fred collects that information and relays it to the seller, who adjusts its prices accordingly. There is no invasion of privacy here because you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in the park, especially once you decide to project the contents of your laptop onto a screen. And doing that, you relinquish control over the information. So Fred is not reaching out and grabbing it from you against your will. He's simply collecting information that you have kind of released from your public, from your control by projecting it onto a screen in the middle of a public park. You have no reasonable expectation of privacy in that context. So the question is, what are online retailers really doing? Now, so you might think, if you think they're invading your privacy when they engage in online personalized pricing, that they are doing the equivalent of what Fred does when he peers into your living room and collects that information about you as you browse online for cookie jars. So they're collecting information about you without your consent in a context in which you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and they're using it to their advantage. So you might say, if retailers are like Fred, who's staring outside of your, staring into your house from outside of it, then they are doing something equally wrong when they personalize prices. So the question is, does that argument work? And I'm not sure that it does. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what online personalized pricers doing? Is it more like peering through your living room window, or is it more like writing down what you display in the public park? It's true that you are browsing in your living room, you are doing that, but you are browsing on someone else's website. And so it's quite possible, someone might claim, and I'm sympathetic to this view, that what online retailers are doing is no different really than what car salespeople are doing when they try to discern your reservation price for a car based on what you say and do in the showroom. Now, what I've done here is not shown you that the argument succeeds for sure, and I haven't shown you that it definitely fails. But what I've tried to do is raise some questions about it. So the argument from invasion of privacy says that what online personalized pricers are doing is like what Fred is doing when he stares into your house through your living room window and writes down what you're doing online. But I think there's at least reason to think that what online personalized pricers are doing is perhaps more like what Fred is doing when he's copying down what you're doing in the public park, or what car salespeople are doing when they look at you wandering around the showroom and try to figure out how much do you really want this car, and how good of a negotiator do I think you're going to be. The question is, how do we contextualize what online personalized prices are doing? Is it more like Fred staring through your window, or is it more like people just watching what you're doing in a public space? I think there's at least some reason to think that it's more like what you're doing in a public space. It's true we want some privacy, and that's why we shop online, but that might be privacy from other shoppers and not the retailer. So the argument is weak, this argument. But I think there's a better argument here, and this is going to rely on an analogy, and I think I can get it done in 5 minutes. I won't go over objections and replies, but I'll leave that for you folks at the end. So I think the problem with OPP is that it's a problem about unfair competition. So when there's a possibility for a sale, there's the social surplus. And I think what retailers do when they personalize prices online is they compete unfairly for that surplus that's been created by the transaction. So here's an analogy, which is peculiarly American, but hopefully it translates, translated into your favorite sport context. So let's say you play in a local baseball league. You play for a team called New York. This is just a local baseball league. And you play against another team called Houston. So this isn't a high stakes competition, but you're both trying to win. Houston is hitting unusually well. So in baseball, you try to get hits and score runs that way. Houston seems to know the types of pitches that your team's pitchers are going to throw. In fact, Houston does know what pitches your pitchers are going to throw, because that's because their batters are wearing special glasses which predict pitch type based on factors like arm angle, stride length, what the count is, how many balls and strikes have been thrown, what pitches have been thrown recently, and some other factors. You can see, as a member of New York, that Houston's batters are wearing those special glasses, but you have no idea what they do. This technology is new, and only a few people know about it. Let me further stipulate that the glasses are not forbidden by the rules of baseball. The technology is so new that, in fact, the game's rulemaking authorities haven't contemplated their use in competition. Still, I claim what Houston is doing is wrong. They are competing unfairly against your team by helping themselves to this new technology. Now, to sharpen that intuition, maybe you're with me so far, but maybe you're not, but maybe I can bring you on board with this. Imagine there's another game. It's called Baseball Star. Philosophers love to talk like this. I can't help myself. So Baseball Star is exactly like baseball, except in a Baseball Star, the pitchers announce what type of pitch they are throwing before they throw it. So part of the deal with baseball is that you don't know what pitch is coming, so it's quite hard to hit it. But if you know what pitch is coming, then it's much easier to hit. So in Baseball Star, they tell you what pitches are going to be thrown. So let's suppose in this game, there's a lot more hitting. What Houston does in the example that I described previously is unfair because they are playing by the standards of Baseball Star, but you are playing according to the standards of baseball. So in Baseball Star, you know what pitch is coming. In baseball, you're not supposed to know, but you do know because you have those special glasses. Even though they're not illegal, they create an unfair advantage. So it's very important in my analysis that you and your teammates on New York don't know, and it is unreasonable for you to have known what the glasses do. So if you did know or you should have known, then your playing Houston might be construed as an act of consent to their use of the glasses in the game. Now, additional considerations may need to hold, chief among them that it is possible for you not to play Houston. So if you consent, typically there's a variety of conditions have to be in place. One is that it's impossible for you not to consent, that you have a decent option. So I've constructed this somewhat fantastical analogy, but what I'm trying to get you to do is try to think about this idea of competition and ask what it means for competition to be fair. And what I'm trying to get you to think is that, in this example I've described, Houston is playing unfairly against your team, New York. I think this situation is analogous to the situation that online shoppers find themselves in with respect to online retailers who personalize prices. So Houston, in our example, is using a new and largely unknown technology to gain an advantage over its baseball opponent. So they're competing unfairly for runs in the game. Online retailers are using a new and largely unknown technology to gain an advantage over buyers. They are competing unfairly for the social surplus generated by the transaction. So in the baseball example that there are sports like Baseball Star where people know what type of pitch is going to be thrown, but you think quite reasonably that you're playing baseball. And by the same token, you know that there are contexts in which retailers try to tailor prices to individuals, flea markets, real estate sales, car dealerships, mortgage brokers, furniture stores, maybe. But you reasonably think that you're not in such a context. If you're in such a context, you're ready for it. You've accepted it, and maybe you've taken some kind of steps to still your nerves and prepare yourself for that kind of competition. But you don't think you're in that context, so you don't make the necessary preparations. What Houston is doing is wrong, I claim, and so is what online personalized pricers are doing. I have some objections, but I'm going to skip them in the interest of time. So, and get to my conclusion. So what now? So I've identified a reason of unfairness for retailers not to personalize prices. Now, that's not quite an argument that personalized pricing is wrong, all things considered. Not quite. But I actually think we should treat it as such. I think we should treat online personalized pricing the way we treat other kinds of pricing practices. And it should be disclosed, it should be known. So all of the kinds of price discrimination that we are familiar with and that we basically accept occur in the open. Senior and student discounts are publicized, bulk discounts, rebates. It's common knowledge that the prices of houses and new cars are subject to negotiation. What's not public is online personalized pricing. So if we want it to be legitimate, we should kind of move it into the realm of publicity. This may happen on its own over time as people become aware of the practice. Companies may even admit it. That might help. But in the meantime, since it's not common knowledge, they should disclose that they're using this practice. And if they don't, they should not personalize prices. And that's pretty much it. My final slide is a wrap-up slide, just kind of summarizing where we've been. We've been talking about online personalized pricing, put it in context, offered a couple different arguments against it, which target that practice specifically. One, this invasion of privacy argument, I think doesn't work. The other, this unfair competition argument, I think does. Thank you so much for your attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Jeff, for an absolutely crystal clear and very thought-provoking presentation. Can I encourage our audience to put their questions into the Q&A box? I think Rita and I have a couple of questions of our own. Then when the Q&A box has been populated, we'll start working our way through those. So I wonder if I could, I have a whole bunch of questions, but let me just pick one. I wonder if I could push back slightly on this question of the violation of privacy. So when I go to a car sales room to buy a car, I'm well aware of the fact that everything I do is being watched and that I have to be on my guard, and I can do my research before I go to the car showroom, and I genuinely understand what I'm getting into. When a website is collecting information about me, it could be doing so in a way that I'm utterly unaware of. In a way, in other words, that speaks to your other argument. And it may be incredibly hard for me to avoid that sort of collection. So I wonder if I have as much control over what I reveal when I go to someone else's website as I do when I go to a car showroom. And if I don't have as much control, does the privacy argument really fail?
So the concern is that that there really is an invasion of privacy because
there's a cookie from
Right.
cookiejarcollectors.com on my website, on my computer, and they're gathering information about all sorts of stuff to do with me, what books I read, what news websites I go to. Everything I do is something they're looking at via the cookie. It seems that the privacy invasion is considerably greater than it is in the 2 hours I spend negotiating over a new car.
Yeah, what I'm relying on in the paper is this idea of a reasonable expectation of privacy. So if someone is peering inside your home, that's an invasion of privacy. But then if you're in a public space and someone's collecting information about you, that's not an invasion of privacy, even if they collect quite a bit of information about you, because you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in that space. I think to some extent that might be an American versus European thing. I think maybe Europeans are a little bit more wary about people even collecting information about you in a public space.
We are the most surveyed country in Europe, in England.
Oh, yeah. So maybe not the UK. You guys have cameras
At least
everywhere.
We're used to that. I'm just wondering how much of a public space somebody's website really is.
So I think to some extent it's a there's like a descriptive question here, and then there's a normative question here. So as a matter of fact, so we talk about reasonable expectation of privacy, that can be kind of understood descriptively or normatively. When people are online, and I want to address like kind of the volume of information too, that's like almost even like a separate question. But when people are online, I think sophisticated users of the internet understand that everything they do is being tracked. They're on someone else's website. It's like they're in a public space, at least with regard to the owner of the website, not with regard to other people who might also be browsing on the website. But it is the case that
Presumably.
like less sophisticated users of the internet don't have that understanding that they understand that, yes, I'm being tracked in a certain way. I've done a search on X, and now an ad for X is popping up in my social media account. The further question is about, what is reasonable in the normative sense, which is what people ought to expect. And there, I think we almost begin to shade into the question about what is fair for people to collect. So I mean, I think things are changing along these lines, but the real question is, one question is what is reasonable to expect on these sites, and what do people actually expect when they're there? What is reasonable for them to expect? And the further question is the amount of information. I agree that retailers collect an enormous amount of information, and others collect an enormous amount of information about us. Not all of it is terribly useful. In the aggregate, it can be, but just the volume alone, I think, should not give us too much concern. It's the quality of information that they collect, which may or may not be as useful as what the car salesman sees when he or she watches you in the showroom.
Maybe, although the car salesman can't buy my history from Facebook.
That's true.
And Rita.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jeff. That was incredibly clear and so interesting. I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and it seems like my biggest question is also one of our participants' biggest questions, so I'll just lump them together. So I've been thinking a lot about your proposed solution of disclosure and what that means for the entire question of fairness. And I guess I'm just wondering to what extent we can expect disclosure to be effective in resolving problems connected to fairness, especially if you take into account the fact that nowadays, especially in the European Union, I'm not entirely sure how it is in other places, but when you visit a website, you have to consent to cookies. You have to consent to sometimes a very long list of items that tell you how your information is being stored and used. And what happens in practice is that most people just click I consent without ever reading anything and without ever being truly informed about what's happening to their data and what's being stored in their computer from this website and all of that. And one of our participants is also asking about this. So they're saying, does the idea of informed consent versus consent matter when we tick the agree to being tracked cookies box? What do you think about this?
Yeah, so the box that I click, I'm probably clicked, when I visited the your website, I'm sure I clicked a box saying that I agree to something. So it would have to be, you need a sort of clear disclosure and an opportunity to consent. And so, a long list of conditions which people can be expected not to really understand or pay attention to is not going to be sufficient. It would have to be some clearly set apart disclosure in plain English indicating that this is happening. So what gets buried in some kind of statement about what we're doing with your information. I mean, there are ways to put things in plain English that would be satisfactory, but the way things happen now, whatever I'm agreeing to with iTunes or something that Apple puts out is insufficient. I mean, you say, well, good luck getting corporations to do this. Yeah, I understand. I'm trying to just articulate what I think they ought to do.
But at the same time, even if they do disclose this in very plain terms and it's easily understandable by your average customer, if that average customer doesn't really have an alternative, then does the disclosure fix the fairness problem?
So I think it does. So I'm imagining that they do have alternatives. So I don't think this is a case of exploitation. So the one worry is that, is what's going on here a kind of exploitation? Companies are taking advantage of people who don't have other options and getting some big benefit out of them. So I fall down a pit and you have a rope and you say, I'll give you the rope for $1,000 or something like that. That's exploitative, even though it may benefit me. I don't think that is the right way to think about this. Not that I was saying you were, but in the case of these big retailers, these online retailers, people do have other choices. So your Walmart is selling, your Staples is selling me a stapler at some price. It's possible for me to go to another website and try to get a different price. So there typically are other options. It's just that what I think is wrong is this competition, at that specific site. They're not playing fairly in that particular competition. But I think there are other choices. I think the market provides other choices. If there are not other choices, then I think we get into worries about exploitation. But I think as a general matter, that's not what's going on here, because exploitation requires basically having no other good options.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question here from Don Lang, who's one of our research fellows at the Reputation Center. Don's asking a question that he characterizes as devil's advocate. I'm going to characterize it as a question about whether our moral intuition here is subject to a framing problem. So he says, if we frame price discrimination of any sort, including online personalized pricing, as an attempt to get some customers to pay more than they otherwise would, the practice seems wrong. But he says, as per the way we usually talk about price discrimination in big pharma, where it's all about finding a way to charge less in the developing world, if we frame the practice instead as a way of extending discounts and therefore finding out which customers can't afford to pay the normal price, which is a completely isomorphic statement of what's going on, it feels less wrong. And therefore, I wonder if, and Don, I guess, is wondering whether our moral intuition is just letting us down here because we're framing the question, because it's incredibly sensitive to the way that the question is framed. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's good. So I know Don. Don, this is not the Houston example is not your example, but this Don gave actually a talk at Bentley a year ago where he gave some explanation involving Houston and baseball. So, but it's nearby. So as far as I understand that. So if there's ways of putting this, and I think corporations themselves, if they're ever forced to admit that they're doing this, will figure out very attractive ways of framing what it is that they're doing for consumers. And that just might be, price optimization. We're giving discounts to people. I think that, yes, you could put it that way. But it would still be wrong for the reasons that I gave. It would still be this kind of unfair competition. Some people are paying more, some people are paying less. And those you could consider that upcharges or discounts. But when we think about what happens between buyers and sellers in that moment, one is engaged in a certain kind of activity and using it to their advantage. I don't think that's deniable. Yeah, it may be to the consumer's advantage too in some cases. The idea that, well, this person, we're just trying to make a sale, right? So we're going to figure out the price that allows us to make the sale. But I still think that what's going on in that case is wrong, because I think why are companies engaged in these practices? I mean, I think they're engaged in them. They're not like on the lookout for ways that they can give people discounts. I suspect that they're on the lookout for ways to maximize transactions and surplus from the transactions. So I understand what you're saying. The framing is important, but I think the way I'm framing it is a legitimate way to frame it. And I'm not quite sure how the argument would go from framing it as companies are looking to give discounts to where they can to it's in fact an okay thing to do. So I think the way I frame it is accurate. There may be other accurate ways to frame it. I don't know how you get from those accurate ways to a different conclusion, though I'd be open to considering that argument.
So.
We have a question here that I find very interesting. I'm probably going to mispronounce your name. I'm sorry about that. But this question comes from Eslem Shen. And I think you already touched upon some of these things, but I'd like to have a clearer picture of what you think about this. So Eslem is wondering what importance intention has when we look at the moral dilemma involved in price personalization. So Eslem says, for instance, in Amazon's case, the intention probably is to get most of the surplus, but in the pharmaceutical case that you spoke about, maybe the intention was to engage in some sort of social responsibility to fulfill some sort of social purpose. And so the question is, do you think that intention is completely irrelevant in these cases?
I like that question. By the way, when I dart over here, I'm trying to take notes. So I think I'm committed to saying that intention is not relevant here. I can be persuaded this is somehow a deep problem for the paper, but so when the pharmaceutical company is offering discounts to people who can't afford it, then that seems like a noble thing in a certain way. And then maybe when someone else is offering higher prices or capturing more of the social surplus, that's maybe not quite so good. But as a general matter, I think we try to evaluate. When I think about trying to evaluate the activities of business actors, I try to evaluate them. It's like, what action are you performing here? What activity are you engaged in? And is that activity a permissible activity or an impermissible activity? And as a general matter, I think that the intention is not, maybe I should say the motive is not relevant. What it is that you're trying to do, your plan can be relevant, but we try to evaluate the action itself and not the motive. I mean, giving someone a discount, which we can understand what is going on in the case of price discrimination, sounds like a good thing. And in general, I think price discrimination is okay. And the drug case is a good example of why it's okay. It's this particular practice which I think is a problem. And I don't think it's a matter of it's because in general people are trying to maximize their own welfare. I suspect that they're trying to do that across most actions, and I think in the pharmaceutical case that might be true as well. But I like the question. I think I like the question more than my answer.
I have a question that's a convex combination of something I've been worrying about and something that Francesco Lobuono, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Francesco, has put into the Q&A box. We will send you an electronic record of all these Q&A questions, Jeff, as we're not going to get through all of them. I've been trying to understand what your foundational moral position is. So in the following sense, you're arguing that there is something wrong with online price discrimination when you don't tell people it's going on. So in some sense, you're denying them the opportunity to use their rational selves to make rational decisions. It's about respect for my rational capacities. It feels vaguely Kantian. And Francesco is saying, well, he has different intuitions. He's vaguely utilitarian, and he feels that any form of price discrimination is justifiable because it maximizes aggregate utility. Is that a fair statement of what the difference between you and him is? Are you essentially taking a sort of deontological approach as opposed to a strictly utilitarian approach, or am I being unfair to you?
I try. So when I guess this similar to my last answer. It's kind of a bigger question. I don't. So my general approach to business ethics is to try to, or just questions about, ethics in the kind of businesses and markets, and that's the area that I work in. It's not to begin with theory, but to try to begin with some intuitions, appeal to principles that, maybe we call the mid-level moral principles that might be supported by a number of different fundamental moral theories. And so
I'm engaged in a sort of revealed preference argument. So it feels like when I'm informed, it's fine. When I'm not informed, it's not fine. It's something to do with my capacity for rational thought. And it's not about, you can maximize utility without telling me what's going on, right? So I'm just wondering, when I unpick your argument, it boils down to the distinction between those two concerns.
That, I think, is a fair way of putting it. I may have to think about that slightly harder. I do think that if you're convinced by arguments that price discrimination generally increases aggregate welfare when it enables producers to increase output, if you're confident that producers are increasing output when they engage in online price personalization, then you might think, well, this must be good because we've got the mathematics to prove it. That's a big if. I'm not sure that that's really what's happening. The Staples case is interesting. I'll just kind of say a side note. So the people who were charged more at Staples were poorer. They had less money. They just happened to be located in a zip code with no close competitors to Staples. So the general thought is that, well, in this scheme of price personalization, that the poor people will be charged less because they're willing to pay less. And then the rich people will be charged more. And so it's kind of all works out. It's not really true in practice. It just, people who are willing to pay more are not necessarily the rich people. It's just the people who could be people with fewer options, or people who are more desperate for one reason or another. I mean, I do think I'm appealing to this idea of fairness and consent matters. Facts about social welfare are not irrelevant to my thinking about what is the right thing to do, but not really driving it. So insofar as you're really committed to utilitarianism, some kind, or some version of consequentialism, and you're confident that online price personalization will lead to that, as opposed to simply be a transfer of wealth from producers to consumers, consumers to producers, then yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I feel like we don't have the data for that.
I'm not coming from there. I'm simply
right. I'm speaking. Let's go through you.
I'm proposing an interpretation of your main results. And I guess even with the zip code argument, in expectation, you're transferring from the rich to the poor, right? It's just that a few poor people slip through the net, and that's fine if you're a completely strict utilitarian.
So I don't know what's going on. I mean, look, two ways to understand what's happening in price discrimination. One is that you're transferring wealth from richer consumers to poorer consumers, but you're limiting deadweight losses. You're increasing the number of transactions. Another way of understanding what's going on here, and I think this is equally legitimate, is you're transferring wealth from consumers to producers. Producers are getting more of the social surplus. They're getting, if they're doing it right, they're getting all of it.
A really good monopolist who does perfect price discrimination, I'm not saying this is morally acceptable, but perfect price discrimination by a monopolist generates maximal welfare and turns all the consumer surplus over to the monopolist. So if you're a headbanger utilitarian, I guess that's okay. Anyway, we are running out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you, Jeff. I could happily keep going for another hour, but we always finish on time. So I'll just finish by thanking you. And I'll also advertise for our audience. Our next seminar is taking place on Thursday, the 3rd of December at 4 o'clock. And Amy Seppenwall is going to be speaking to us. And her paper is entitled Against Consumer Boycotts. And it promises to be another fascinating event. But for now, bang on time, I'm going to stop. Thank you, everyone who put questions into the Q&A box. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but Jeff will receive all of them. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks so much.